And good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everybody today. I wanted to welcome everybody. We do have a potential special announcement, maybe coming up a little bit later in the call for funsies. And if not, you'll get that email announcement later in the day. But it's quite exciting news from the National Board. The primary focus of today, from our perspective, was to allow us to anticipate issues for nationals. Most of us have either finished our state competitions or at the very least gone deep into our state competitions, so that we have gotten a pretty decent sense of failure points, disaster areas, things to be avoided, roadblocks, all of those sorts of things. Our next third Thursday is going to be pretty late in April. When we're talking about April 15th will be our next third Thursday. So there is time between then and nationals to start pivoting things or changing things in terms of the procedure for courtrooms and things like that. But there is not a lot of time. And it would be a lot easier, since in order to change any of those things, we have to coordinate with Indiana, have the relevant committee of the board, probably competition operations or rules, meet. And then after those things, have the full board vote in one way or another to change a rule or to change a procedure. It would be easier to get that done if we had more warning. And so that's why we're doing this now and not in April. In April, I suspect we'll have more folks in attendance. But by that point, you're really ramping up, right? You're only 3-4 weeks out on nationals. So we wanted to do that today. And I thought that the best way to get us started is to sort of remind everybody where we actually are right now, what the current plans are. Everybody has the current draft rules. Everybody has the current draft competition operations manual, but that also left some blanks. And so I thought we would start out by having Tim Calgreen from Indiana sort of read y'all in on what the current thinking is for Evansville a couple months out and where we are. And then we can turn to a discussion of what we might want to do differently, if anything, or whether we think we're kind of roughly on path and we'll just have to deal with the crises as they hit us. So, Tim?
Yeah, sure. To those running your competitions, I hope it's all going well. I'll say, at least from our perspective, running Indiana's regional state competitions, it went about as well as we could have hoped, if not better than we could have hoped. So we're at least internally feeling a confidence going into this and a comfort with this. And when we're ready to bring you on board with it. I have been muted. Have I been muted the whole time? Sorry.
No, we can hear you, dude.
Oh, okay. Just saw it popped up that I was muted. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure people have seen this before, but I dropped in the chat again the home web page for the competition. Team registration is open for those that have completed their state competition and have the team that is going to be participating. Registration is open there. That's one of the big parts I want to point out from there. The other is the schedule, just again, so everybody knows the plan is that for competition week, the events will start on Wednesday, May 12th in the evening with our virtual pin exchange. So a welcoming piece with that. Thursday, May 13th is when the rounds of competition begin. We're running 2 rounds on Thursday, 1 round on Friday, 1 round on Saturday, and then we'll complete our 4 rounds. We'll announce the top 2, the championship round later on Saturday, awards to close. So that's all there on the schedule to make sure that your teams are blocking off basically, Wednesday evening through Saturday to participate. I know we've gotten quite a few questions about judges from other states, that you're all anxious to bring judges that would typically come. Here's our current response is we're currently recruiting Indiana judges, and like we typically would, and have the majority of the competition be staffed by the local judges. So we're trying to do that now. April 1st is our timeline of when we want to open it up to the states. But at that point, even because it's so much easier to virtually travel and just click the link, we're going to still almost make it a soft national as our opening is the plan. State coordinators maybe try to pick and choose 2 to 3. And so the idea there at that point is if each state brings 3 judges, that's 150 judges. That takes up the whole competition. So kind of a soft piece with that too. We'll do that for 2 or 3 weeks. And as we need more, we'll keep asking out again. So that's our plan with judges for the competition and the incorporation of the national judging piece. As far as procedures, like I said, our state and regional competition went well. So we're going to be putting together our kind of procedure document. And the plan at this point is to run it through COPS, make sure that still works out, and keep you informed as we do that. So John will be in touch here in the next week or two with our plan going forward. But that's kind of the high level piece at that point. I guess I'll kind of pause and see if there's any questions, but we're getting ramped up and excited.
So I'll open the floor for questions from folks who are wondering about how things are currently slated to work and what the current thinking in Evansville is.
I think we've all had virtual, those of us who've done it already have had virtual experiences with it. And in Delaware, at least, it went very well. So I have positive feedback for that.
Great.
One thing that I think it bears mentioning is my understanding is the current idea for the actual administration is going to be to use a combination of overall Zoom rooms and then breakout rooms within those Zoom rooms. So there won't be, 23, 24, 25 competing rooms. There will be probably 6 or so courtrooms that are going to be the macro courtroom, and then within those rooms there'll be breakout rooms, and that is going to allow Indiana to staff each of the courtrooms at the bigger level with somebody who can be there the whole time in case something goes wrong, or to move people in and out of breakout rooms. And then, if you're in a breakout room and something happens that's a problem, you don't have to come log into a brand new Zoom room. You just leave the breakout room back to the main hall and somebody can respond more quickly. So, we'd had a bunch of different discussions about different models for that. And I know states have done all kinds of different things with that. But that's the way that Indiana is leaning right now. And it certainly is consistent with, the way at least some states have run their competitions for given rounds. And it's a nice way to keep a hybrid in the flexibility of not trying to dump everybody into 1 or 2 rooms where you've got hundreds of people arriving at the same time, but also not to create an overwhelmingly large number of rooms that have to be staffed.
Right. The other thing on staffing, Delaware, we used our paralegal association, who ordinarily functions as runners and bailiffs in our competition, and they helped manage the breakout rooms. So that's a possibility too in terms of volunteers.
Tim, in Georgia,
Hello?
hi.
No, Pat, we hear you.
Okay.
Tim, in Georgia, we're running our season through one Zoom account where we have between 6 and 10 courtrooms in that one account. And one thing that has helped me each night doing it is having the email addresses of any of the teams who's logging in to Zoom ready to preload as a pre-sorted breakout room. So if any of those accounts, or when those accounts log in, they get automatically shuffled into their appropriate courtroom or team room or the jury room and whatnot. So it'll be pretty quick and easy, I think, if you have all of the potential email addresses of the judging panel and then of the teams handy, and then you can make that that Excel sheet pretty easily and then drop it into the meeting right before you open it. And that will help not having to have someone hand shuffle 300 people as they log in, trying to figure out who they belong to and whatnot. It cuts down on a little bit of that aspect of things. So I can help you sort that out and kind of run that side of the idea if you need help with that or want to look at that.
Thanks for the suggestion there. We'll think about that one too. Yeah. We did the I don't say hand shuffling for our state competition, but having a pretty I don't say strict, maybe not the right word, but the strict naming protocol to be able to have them sorted by that courtroom helped tremendously. And each one of our the terminology we used was each Zoom link was a courthouse and there were courtrooms within the house.
Yeah.
So for each courthouse that we had, we used 6 courtrooms within it. So each one probably had about anywhere from 100 to 150. And if they did the naming protocol right, we were able to sort in really about 5 to 8 minutes. So it really, we got it down to a pretty good science. But
I always had a problem of if kids log in and it takes them 5 minutes to figure out, remember, how do I rename myself once I'm on here, and then trying to do it and all that kind of thing. So if they can do that in the breakout room, I don't have to deal with them. I don't have to see them. They wind up down there and their coach can get on them for it.
Right. No, but it's a good idea. We'll kick that around too.
Yeah. Okay.
And Michael, something I did to battle that is I had, when they logged in, I had a slide up. I was sharing my screen as the manager that reminded them of the naming protocol. So it just had the naming protocol on there.
Oh, okay.
It reminded my judges what round it was, because I had all of our, judges don't know. They may have come in the middle. So they're like, what round are we in? So what round it was, and then where they could find matchups for the next round. That was all just on a big slide. Okay. So then when they logged in, if they didn't remember, which most of them didn't, they could see the naming protocol. And that actually helped immensely. And then somebody had the idea, I think it came through in the email, putting the judges in judges' chambers first, moving them. That worked excellently for me. So once my judges got logged in and round, I could dump them over and they could chat with one another about whatever while I sorted kids and made sure everybody was squared away in the main room.
In the Zoom email thing, you get up to 200 email addresses to pre-sort. And I always made sure that all my judging panel members were in that 200. So as soon as they log in, they just automatically wind up over there. I never even see them in the main room. And then I have someone who's my jury room host, who's in there helping rename people and post links to score sheets and stuff like that. So it does keep them out of the out of steerage where the kids are.
Yep. And the kids knew that they might have judges in the room for a moment, and we talked about that beforehand. Okay. That there may be judges in the main room for a few minutes until I can move them all. But they kind of knew to be quiet, their cameras off, and not be available until the judges all got out of there.
And even Tim, using that idea just for judging panels, just so when they log in, they automatically wind up in the jury room, just to keep them separate might be another easy way to do it.
Thanks. I want to,
because they don't read directions.
As I say, I want to answer Liz's question too. I put in the chat the answer about the scheduling and the time zone, so take a look for that for everybody. But the question about the pin exchange, for when your team registers, whether it is the team or the state coordinator that registers on behalf of the team, one of the questions on the registration form is, do you plan to participate in part of the pin exchange? If so, we are going, the timing is on that form. We're going to ask that all the materials be sent to us. We will then reshuffle and redistribute back out to the schools. So we will take care of all of that from our office here. I don't have that calendar date in front of me, so I don't know if Kayla's listening will be able to chime in and help me out here, but it's sometime kind of before the event, so that we can get it reshuffled and shipped out before, so they get it right about when the event starts. So that's how we're going to do the pin exchange that way. So for all of your timings, think of that. We need to be able to receive it and the date's on there by that date so we can get it shuffled out and sent back out before the competition begins and we make our trip to Evansville.
Tim, do you guys have a plan yet for how you're going to sort of create some of the informal social knocking around during the pin exchange as opposed to just, I mean, I know that you guys have grade plans for like the presentation part, but is there some mechanism by which you guys have sort of schemed out a way to do that?
We are working on it, but we've got ideas bouncing, kind of a trivia show. We got kind of meet and greet pieces in there that we're going to be able to do. So we've got the ideas. We're just trying to how to figure out the best way to make it to the virtual timeline. You might catch in the chat that April 26th is the deadline we need to receive anything for the pin exchange. So make sure you calculate your shipping times with that, but we need to receive it by April 26th.
I wanted to make one point on the judges showing up in the rooms. This happened in Pennsylvania, specifically a couple of times in Philadelphia. We had judges who would show up in the rooms having set the things the way that we asked them to, which was to say, don't show non-video participants so that you can get the bigger pictures of the video participants. And then either because they just weren't thinking or because there are judges, and if there's something that can possibly go wrong, they will have it go wrong. Either then or during recesses when the students would turn off their cameras, our judges decided that they were alone and started conferring about the results of the round, the teams, making comments about personal, students particularly. It was not well received. So, obviously we will orient the judges on that, but if you guys do have state competitions still to come, and if you do what we do and ask them to set their Zoom that way, just remind them that they're never alone, that in fact, not only are the students are there, the teachers are there, the coaches are there, their parents are there, their grandparents are there. That the grandparent who did not mute and started swearing when her grandson made a great objection, that's something that we all sort of laugh about and be like, poor kid. The judges actively insulting members of the team is not something that we can laugh about in the same way. It's a much more dark and hateful laughter. So just if you haven't been giving that guidance to your judges, learn from my pain.
After last month, when you mentioned that, I've included the Philadelphia reminder in my judging panel orientations to remind them of that. So yes, like, oh, it's bad.
We had the same thing. And so then in subsequent rounds, I had them, if they wanted to talk to one another, to let me know. And then I dumped them back in chambers if they wanted to, because I had a coach actually pop out and say, they're deliberating in front of everyone. And I said, go back and tell them to stop. So it happened. But as we went on, I reminded them to, if you want to leave and talk, then you have to tell me. You can't just start talking.
All right, let me ask the $64,000 question, and then we can start thinking about the other questions. I know Ellen has been thinking about things to ask, and I have, and all that. How are folks doing on time? How are, we had talked about the fact that we do not intend to change our time rules to extend time to allow for virtual competition. I know in Pennsylvania, we did not extend additional time to allow for that. We just gave the presiding judge the ability to sort of say, if there was a technical disconnection, it stopped the clock, or to add a few seconds or whatever. One of the major things that our teams are going to want to know on April 1st is how much time do we have for our case? So any thoughts on how things have been going in terms of teams and time?
In Connecticut, we just finished up our state finals yesterday. And we didn't have any significant time issues throughout our competition. We had a few trials run long, but it was really more attributable to the case than to than to any kind of tech issues. When we did have tech issues, the judges just exercised their discretion and allowed a few minutes for the kids to get reconnected. So I think we only had, I think of the 88 trials we did, we had one trial where there was what I would consider to be a disabling tech issue, and that was attributable to the judge, not the students.
We've had a hard time with kids keeping together on time in Georgia. We've had the two timekeepers wind up like 3 minutes apart, halfway through the second witness. And we think it's a function of them not sitting next to each other to hear the beeps and to kind of have that in sync thing. So we're telling the judges to pay attention to the chat and to the cards on screen. And once you see it get, any kind of time apart from each other, be proactive, stop the trial, and find out what's going on and kind of reset everything. So not waiting for a timekeeper to speak up, saying, "Oh, we're 50 seconds apart," but go ahead and handle that.
We have bad time rules in Pennsylvania that I'm probably going to try to change this year. But even so, we've had a grotesque difficulty with that. And that has been our biggest challenge, is the timekeepers separating. About 3 weeks into the competition, we introduced a new rule that was very, very clear, that after each performance ended, they had to, in the public chat, post their times, rather than sort of leaving it to them to bring it to the judge's attention. And frankly, we used an official timekeeper in a couple of rounds where we had teams that had just had problems. But for our states next week, that's going to be our intention. And I've actually got an example of a chat log that shows that we can show it to our timekeepers if we want to during orientation. At the very least, I think we need to do that, because we definitely had the same thing. When they're sitting next to each other and somebody forgets to stop it, the guy next to him stops it, and oh yeah, that's right, I'm supposed to stop, it's an objection or whatever. But I time kept around and found that there were times that I was 30 seconds off of the two students and they were together, which means I screwed something up. So it's definitely a different ball game virtually, but we've found more success once we started making it really, really explicit, like thou shalt in the public chat after everything put up both the amount of time expired and the amount of time you believe is remaining.
Utah had similar issues at the very beginning, and till I lowered the hammer and said, "You will do this," or else. And then everything started coming together for the bailiffs. And then I reminded the judges to ask them after each section to make sure they gave the bailiffs time to chat with each other and then post to everyone to everyone in the chat. So that's been very, very helpful, but I had to really get on everybody about that.
Ours started
So-
kind of organically doing that. So I think at the beginning they had issues, and then they figured out that they needed to pause. I also baked a pause into my presiders checklist so that they would allow scorers to catch up. So my presiders had a 30-second pause. That doesn't seem long, but it's long enough that the timekeepers can announce the time, and the the scorers can catch up if they're behind any. So that helped immensely as well.
I got a different time question. How many of you have a rule that creates sort of an all-stop time, like a 3-hour curfew or whatever your curfew might be for the entire trial? Do any of you?
Looks like Indiana does and nobody else does.
No, except I go in and go like this to the judge.
Yeah, and
Kentucky does too, looks like.
in person, I certainly did that with the courtrooms, just because we always seem to have that one outlier trial. Like everybody else is kind of in that 2.5 hour range, and then there's one trial that goes
One
3 hours.
judge every time.
Always one.
It's just one. And I can sit there and tell you which one it's going to be.
Yep.
Every single time. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, The issue is, we try and, when we have multi-round days, we try and build a lot of time in, but really it's just part is getting the kids, a break and getting the volunteers who are going multi-round a break too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's it. Yeah. It was, we worked with Empire, and they have that in their rules, and they had suggested it. So I was just curious to see what the other states do.
It is a little weird without a building. I could blame it on the building in the past that they're literally going to kick us out the front door if we don't get out of here. So without that limit, there are some folks who take that time to pontificate upon mock trial. But usually when we're in person, I don't have an issue because I can just, security is going to drag you out the front door if we don't get out of here. So we got to go.
Well, yeah, in a building you can, because I always send the bailiff in and he has a gun. So, but yeah, there's always one. And what I kept getting hit with was, well, it's virtual. We have all the time in the world. I said, no, you don't. Some of us have to go to bed before midnight. So it's, so yeah, but there's always one.
And some of us have scheduled another preliminary round to start on the same Zoom account. So we had them structured at middle school for about 3.5 hours, and that was cutting it close. I mean, that includes letting everyone in. And so finally we went for high school. We went rounds starting at 8:30, 12:30, and 4:30. And they were all done in plenty of time with the exception of that one judge. And finally at 12:15, I just entered their room and I said, we're done. We got to get this Zoom link closed so I can open the next one. And, they understood that.
I had a question about ballots in different places. I wondered, so we had a digital ballot, obviously, an online ballot. We used JotForm for hours to put it in. But I had the occasional scorer and presiders who did checklists not submit. And so I had to chase them down, which is fine. But I just wondered if anybody had something they did to help remind them, make sure they did. I don't know. There were a handful of them that, even though I say it again and again, it just disappeared into the ether. There were a couple of times that I had to scramble to figure out what I was going to do for scores when scores didn't manage to get me a ballot. So I just wondered if people had thoughts about that.
So was your problem that they weren't filling in all of the boxes or that they weren't submitting it?
They weren't submitting it. So they would fill it all in, but the problem with JotForm, it doesn't have a great save as you go feature. So they weren't.
It's Google.
Yeah, so they weren't saving as they went, which meant that if they get to the end and they don't submit and then they close their browser, it's gone forever. Yeah. And so I had a couple where it was gone forever. Luckily, I had recordings. Recreate their work. Freedom. But I don't know. It was just a trouble with short of watching it. Is it coming or is it not coming? It was really hard to know.
So, I did two things that I thought helped the situation immensely. Number one, I linked the Gmail account that the JotForms were going to my phone. So as soon as the ballot was received, my phone went ping. And so I kept running track of who I had received ballots from. And then I required the judges at the end of their trial, instead of leaving Zoom, leave their room, come back into the main waiting room, and then just checked. It's like, you guys were in courtroom 3. I have the ballots I need. The comment forms were separate. We had comment forms. Comment forms were separate, and just reminded them to please submit their comment forms within 24 hours. I ended up with fewer comment forms, but I never missed a ballot, because those judges that said, oh, I'm going to do it right now. And it's like, well, then you can stay on Zoom with me until you submit the ballot and my phone actually says that I've got it.
Yeah, we did a combination of two of those things that John just mentioned. The first one was we had a help room open. So we did separate Zoom licenses for each courtroom, as opposed to the massive one. And so we said, check back in the courtroom or to the help room or in the tabulation room to make sure everything was received before checking out. And that was one of our measures. The other thing that we encouraged, because it's jot form and it doesn't save and all of those internet unpredictable things, was we said, please use the paper copy, and we mailed everybody paper copies of the ballot and said, do your paper copies and then please submit them at once or like after the trial. So that way it minimized the chance of them either closing out that particular window prematurely, and or also let them recreate their steps. If there was a tech issue, we could just say, hey, well, what did you mean? And walk it through that way.
Cognito Forms, what I use this course, it does have a pretty good save and continue feature. So I can see ones that have started in progress and then flip to submitted when they get done, if they remember to hit that kind of thing. But I had a few people who, seeing it was over at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, would go get something to eat and then just forget to do their score sheet. The next morning I'm looking for it and I'm texting and emailing and calling them frantically. I need this. And they apologize. But that was out of the 850 I've had turned in, I've maybe had like 5 that did that. Most of them were doing the score sheet in process during the round, and before they even got out of the courtroom to the main room, they'd already submitted it. So most of them, and that's doing comments along the way with the scores.
Yeah, we actually didn't even make them come back to the tab room, and only had, I think, 3 mistakes in the entire Philly competition, which was probably 200, 300 total ballots over the course of our rounds. And it was always just somebody who forgot to click the button at the bottom. So what we did was we just, if you hadn't checked in with us, like we knew when your round was over because we got the first score sheet emailed automatically. And we were watching that in real time. And once that happened, we sort of started a mental 15-minute clock. And if we got toward the end of the thing, we sort of like, we would send you an email. And then if it was half an hour, then you were getting a phone call. And we were able to get through it. It was a lot of times the judges who wanted to write copious comments. So in retrospect, maybe separating those two things would have been smart and given them more time to do that and feel heard. But we also have a brief comment period afterward. And I think Zoom fatigue was very real for both the judges and the students this year. So comments went a little quicker.
We didn't do a verbal comment this year just because of the timing of everything. I don't want to make them sit on Zoom while they do the score sheet, but I would send the written comments to the teams the next morning. We only had one round at a time, so I wasn't waiting for this to get done for the next round to be Power Match or anything. And so I would send all the comments to the teams from the night before the next morning. And some of these evaluators were writing like a paragraph per thing. And the coaches said they loved it because it was more information they've gotten and insight from an evaluator than they ever had. And a lot of evaluators liked the idea of being able to type the comments during the competition live, kind of live tweet in a way. So I think we're going to try to definitely use that for next year in person somehow. We'll see.
We found the same thing. We found that the judges loved being able to type the comments on a separate device or a separate screen, and and they could provide more information. And then I think realistically, we always tell the judges that the post-round commentary is usually unhelpful because neither the kids nor the coaches are paying attention because they want to get to lunch. I think to paraphrase Paul, we tell them, you're the last thing standing between them and lunch or dinner. And then from there, we just, and from there, they find the written comments a lot more helpful because they can kind of digest them and then present them to the teams the next day.
We allow literally 1 minute of comments per person.
Good move.
that the timekeeper times. So the timekeeper times it, and they cut them off if they've gone past their minute, because we've had in the past the pontification about whatever. And also I agree with Jonathan that we find that it's not all that helpful, that the feedback that they're getting right then, short of you guys did great and you can breathe now, is not anything that they can really incorporate into the next round in a meaningful way. So, and also sometimes it's just the thing that scorer cares about, right? It's their pet peeve that they're going to talk about. So it's really helped us to have the 1 minute limit. Maybe you want more than a minute, but we have a 1 minute limit kept by our timekeeper, and they stick to it. I also did the video I did this year with some do's and don'ts of giving verbal feedback, which were jokingly, they were extreme on purpose, but helped get across the point that, you know, we don't say mean things about children, or we don't talk about, well, I'm a lawyer and I would have done this instead. So that helps to limit a little bit.
Unless you're in Pennsylvania and you're in the middle of a round.
Yeah. Jess, can you make sure that the do's and don'ts video makes it to the National Training Data Bank
Yes.
on our website so that other states can take advantage of it? Because I
Yes,
suspect that the things that you ask your judges not to do, probably pretty similar to the things we're asking our judges not to do.
It was the top 6 things that they typically do that makes everyone crazy. So yes, I will absolutely share that. That was all done with a grant from Nationals. You will get every minute that video.
Innovation Grants FTW. Ellen, did you have anything else that we wanted to raise in terms of COPS or rules that sort of we wanted to make sure we covered before the end of the time?
Curious about the courtroom artistry component of it. What states have tried? What's worked? Might be some lessons for that moving forward? I think that's one of the questions. And then for those who've had their state event, did you do anything fun, social, or just get it done as you were going through the processes?
Utah, get it done. As far as the artist goes, the biggest thing was trying to get the art after it was completed in a manner that was that I could use to send out for judging. But that was the biggest thing. I had all kinds of different submissions, and it was really difficult to move forward with that part. And that's one of my favorite parts. So it was hard, but the biggest thing was trying to get the screenshots.
Mm-hmm.
They were all over the place.
This is Pat. We didn't do the courtroom artists this year. We just considered it too complicated to figure out how to get stuff to us, get it evaluated and get it back.
We did the court artist contest this year, and we normally have like 30, 35 kids. We had 7. And I tried to do a screenshot at the end of the thing, but for a couple of them, I forgot to do it. But I sent each of the artists a big envelope with a slightly smaller envelope in it to the house, then to put the art in and send it back. So I should be getting, I got one back today. I might have thought about my envelope choice a little bit better. It got kind of a little beat up, but it'll work. So I'm actually getting the physical art pieces back probably tomorrow for a good majority of them, hopefully. And then we'll go from there with it.
Okay.
We tried to get creative with our middle school awards program, and the creative part failed miserably. What did work, however, was a PowerPoint with each of the team names and the highlighting, you know, for the high school, we're planning on highlighting the seniors, inviting the teams to submit, you know, team photos, that sort of thing. So when we do the roll call of the teams that qualified, you know, they'll be recognized that way. But no, we tried to insert a few videos, pre-recorded videos, and the tech got to it. And so, yeah, that didn't work too well. But everyone had a good laugh, and everyone liked picking on me, which is always good. And so that was our failed attempt. I'm sure that Tim and Kayla and Chuck will have much better idea how to jazz up an awards program than we had.
We did have a essay contest again this year. And those were due in middle of March, and so they haven't been evaluated yet. But we will select someone to get the essay contest.
And maybe this, what was one of the biggest surprises that you had during the virtual event that you weren't expecting? Like, we know virtual means there's more opportunity for more judges to come in. The ballot offers potentially more opportunity for feedback. Were there any other surprises that you didn't anticipate that are notable?
Can you guys hear me? This is Matt from Virginia. How y'all doing? Yeah, I learned two things. Number one, the kids are smarter than any of us outright. Totally. Like, for example, we started our states are this weekend, but we were doing regional scrimmages, and the kids started to try to put their stuff on the screen share. And we learned that the permissions weren't working on Zoom for the screen sharing. So for states, we have them screen share before the round begins, just to make sure whoever's doing the screen sharing can do it. That was a kid's solution to the problem. We just adopted it. I know. Why reinvent the wheel? But generally, I mean, it's amazing how adaptive the kids are. At least that's what we've been seeing in Virginia. There are times where they just tell us how to do things. It's really kind of wild. I'm not surprised by it. I'm a former teacher, so kind of like seems like something that should happen, but they're coming up with solutions to things, and they're almost like part of the experience now. It's really neat what's going on here. So I don't know if anyone else has been seeing that, where you'll be someplace and there's a technical difficulty or something doesn't seem to work, and the teams kind of sort it out. We've had that a couple of times, which I found really interesting.
We certainly had that in Philadelphia, and the judges have been very good about being like, okay, whatever it takes, someone get that thing up on the screen, and we'll just deal with the realities of it. And we've had teams, where the other team's person could do it, and so they put it up. We've had a lot of good experience with that. The one thing that I think that we should pass on to our judges, because it was a significant improvement for us, is we had we've had a number of different tech issues, not bad ones, but usually it's one student who fades in and out. And we found that if you're working from a less than stable connection, or if you're a judge and you're in a less than stable connection, just calling into the room and being on headphones and doing your audio through the telephone has made a world's worth of difference, because you can still judge facial expressions and all that, even if you're sort of glitching and blurbing. It's when the audio cuts that it becomes problematic. So we've had a lot of improvement once we started instructing our judges, look, the first time you start experiencing something that's on your end, immediately call into the room and just be ready. And that really, we'd had a couple of problems with it. We had one that almost forced a rematch because, you can imagine the disasters that these things become with mock trial. But once we started telling them, look, if you're a student and you know that your internet connection just isn't quite as strong, no one's going to judge you poorly for having your headphones in. Just call in. I started doing it because the DOJ network had a habit of kicking out right around the time of day that our competition was going, which we found out in a round that we had like 12 of my colleagues actively judging and lost them all at the same time. But I started doing it even for judge orientation. I would call in under a separate link and then just put my phone like under a pillow. And sure enough, in a round where we were orienting and there's a federal, two federal judges I appear in front of sitting there, my DOJ network kicks out and I just paused video, popped this thing up, opened it, and just kept going. Everybody was a little confused. I'm like, look, my network just kicked out, but I logged in. I want you to do the same thing. And we really reduced the number of technical issues we were having when we told people, like, if you have to track the audio and the video.
So you wound up just on audio only for the phone call.
Yeah.
Not being able to see the screen.
Well, I mean, you could do it either way, but doing
Okay.
it the other way doesn't make any sense because it doesn't really help you if you've got a bad internet connection. So yeah,
Right.
we would tell
okay.
them like telephone in for audio, keep your camera on, mute and turn your computer speakers off.
Okay.
Get all of your audio through the headphones, get all of your video through the screen to the extent that it's working.
Gotcha. Okay.
And we found that even when we had students, and we could see it happen where we could, the video was glitching, but you could hear them just fine. It didn't really affect anybody's perception of their performance or scoring. And it really saved us a lot of pain because we had a whole cycle going where, the student couldn't hear. And so he would ask to be repeated. And then that was counting against time. And the other team was pissed that it was counting against time. And so that was our solution. And it really, it made a material difference for us.
So I'll tell a funny story, maybe so we can get out of the doomsday a little, but we had a poor student who froze, the visual froze and the audio for a short minute, and he was trying to get back in and his audio came back, but not his video, and he did not realize that this was happening. So this poor child, and you'll have to excuse my language, this was his language. At first, I mean, everyone can hear him. He says, "Damn it." And they're like trying to let him know, like, "We can hear you." And then he's still frozen. And then he says, "Shit." And he's like, clicking and clicking. And then he finally came back and realized it was stuff. And the presiding judge, to his credit, just went on. He was like, "All right, we're back on it though. Let's just keep going." And I don't know if he ever knew. I'm sure his friends were texting him madly, but poor kid, he was so freaked out. I felt very bad for him.
Well, we had one issue in Utah where the judge was in his chambers hearing the trial, and they decided to upgrade their system at the courthouse and kicked him off. Luckily, I had two judges in that room, and the other one stepped in, and the presiding judge called in on his phone and was listening on his phone until his computers decided to get finished upgrading, and then they just continued on. I mean, that's pretty much what has happened. We've had teams that lost all the internet in the house, so they all jumped on hotspots. And last week, we had terrible winds in Utah where I live, and I lost my internet in the whole house. Luckily, I had a hotspot and was able to jump on. But I mean, these are all little things that they've had to do and we've had to do, and of course I was stressed, but it happens, and the kids are better at it than we are as adults. But yeah, even judges and coordinators have issues.
So Ellen, I know we're getting close to the end of our hour, but I've got a procedural logistical question for everyone that I hope will clarify. So back in the summer and into the fall, when we were kind of coming up with COPS protocols and rules and everything, it was a fool's errand because we hadn't actually done this. And so I'm not sure that what we created is still, I guess, canon. So here's my question. In Iowa, we allowed teams massive flexibility, massive in terms of equity, in terms of access, in terms of just trying to make it work. So we basically told teams that there were three ways that they could present, right? They could present everyone on their own Zoom link, all in different places. As if the school district would allow them to gather, or the public health official would allow them to gather, they could gather, and they would still need multiple cameras because, witness on one, attorneys on one, whoever was doing the screen sharing on one, or some sort of hybrid, like the attorneys could get together, but the witnesses were all scattered. I'm not sure, I can't remember that we gave that kind of flexibility in our rules for nationals. So looking forward, what advice would you have for us on how flexible should we be in allowing teams to be able to present in a way that they're comfortable with, as opposed to these are our rules and everyone needs to abide by them?
John, we did the same thing. We had a hybrid. Some of the students were on individual accounts and some were in a group. And we had several that did both. And so I'm kind of hoping that's what will be allowed at nationals, but that was my question for today. Do we have a hybrid like that, or is that forbidden?
We did the same thing. We had all three, the exact ones that John mentioned. And it was basically whatever the team needs to do to make it work. It worked. We found out through my evaluators all said that what I call the one location model, where they're all in one room on one computer, was the worst of the three. That you couldn't see, you couldn't hear. It was just horrible. And so for later rounds, I said that's no longer allowed, so stop doing it. And then some teams had the attorney's table on one camera, and then like a witness stand that the witnesses would cycle through. They're all in the school together. They're all together, but not on the same camera together. So if they could and wanted to be together as a team, they could. Or if they had to be at home, then they were all on their own individual devices and stuff. And that seemed to work out a whole lot better. Almost to the point where even the one attorney table wasn't that great. And we may want to say, if the team wants to be together, that's fine, but everyone's got to be on their own device or have an attorney stand and a witness stand. And that name just gets updated every time someone else comes in. Or if you want to have the three attorneys in the room together, they're all on their own individual devices on headphones. So there's not that crosstalk or that feedback. But having the personal device is the best in terms of the experience for the evaluators, but do it at school together for that team experience as well.
Yeah, in Connecticut, we followed an own device rule, and that was mainly because we felt that teams that could be together, with the opportunity to sort of set up the three attorneys on one camera and have counsel table in the real virtual courtroom, would have a competitive advantage over those teams where the kids were required to be home, for quarantine purposes. So we required an own device rule. I'd say it was about 50-50. Some teams were strictly at home. Other teams were together in the school building using their Wi-Fi on their own devices. And that worked fine. We know that one team set up a separate room just for openings and closings so that they could have a computer set up separately so that their student who was giving an opening or a closing could be unmasked and move around.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Which I thought was we had rules didn't encourage or forbid it. I thought it was a brilliant adaptation. It really seemed to work very well for them. But yeah, our baseline was you had to be on your own screen at all times.
We had the one head per screen, but the one thing we did change just before was, and we learned this from our invitational that we had in the fall, was that we had initially said attorneys had to stand to present and witnesses had to be seated, but you couldn't hear any of those attorneys when they're standing up. So they had terrible mics, or they were too far away, or they didn't know that you could only see them from the neck down or whatever. There was like a lot of issues. So we just changed it and said you can sit or stand for your presentation, no matter who you are. And that was fine. And some of them chose to stand anyway, knowing that they may be told to sit down if they couldn't be heard. Because some of them, if they get too far away, you can't hear what they're saying. So, but it seemed to work fine. And the kids were actually quite relieved. It was a kid's suggestion. And they were quite relieved to be able to sit so that they could be heard, because they had a lot of trouble at the invitational.
Yeah, Pennsylvania actually chose to go the opposite way from nationals on the sitting standing thing. We insisted that everyone remain seated full stop because we didn't want teams with better cameras or better microphones to have an advantage. And obviously there's a greater diversity, in a state like Pennsylvania than there is of just state champions coming to compete at nationals. So I don't know whether that's something that we would revisit. But we had, we had no difficulties with the student audio pickup or video pickup for that reason. And it definitely proved to be an advantage to have everybody sitting.
I think there's an efficiency in one or the other. The other language that we used was, or at least the philosophy was ability neutral. So you got to choose if you stood or sat. But that language was particularly important to say, to not assume standing and not to assume sitting, but rather just to assume some aspect of stability. So ability neutral, as long as you can be seen one-to-one, whatever works for you is fine, but not movement. And I think that that's one of our unexpected issue, or I don't know if it's an unexpected thing, is that there was greater efficiency in many of the trials, not the tech side or not the timing side, but in terms of the presentation and the movement side, it was more efficient in many of those different aspects of it. So we had one school ask us if they could gather in a courtroom and like pan in and out and all that. And like, no, because that's, I think, wrong from an equity perspective. And then in hindsight, I also think it's wrong from an efficiency perspective, because there was no stopping and starting. Like, you were there, you were ready to go. And it was much more, efficient.
For objections, I saw Paul posted that for the teams that had the one attorney table and the three of them are there, most teams have gotten to the point of the attorney speaking would come up and either to a podium with the microphone or in front of the table straight up to the camera, and then they would stay there for the cross. So they didn't have to, so they weren't sitting at the table way back there. They stood at the microphone or in front of the camera for the cross and then made the objections at that point and everything. Because sitting at the table was a little bit too far away to really be able to hear clearly, unless they had the microphone over there in front of them.
Jessica asked about closed captioning, and we do. I happen to also be a parent to a deaf son and another son with hearing aids. And so we do two things, and this was before me, but we also work with one of our local deaf and hard of hearing services agencies, and we work with an interpreter at a local community college, an interpreter program. So we make those services available. We ask way in advance, and then we have dabbled as of late with closed captioning, because that's a newer feature, I think, for some of the paid accounts within Zoom. Before it was like a third-party integration piece, and now it's available within Zoom for certain types of paid accounts. And so I think that might be something that the national board wants to look at is how are we asking about accessibility and those type of questions in advance, because closed captioning is very different than ASL, right? They're two different languages in terms of structure and its articulation. And that's something that we plan to have in 2022 live in person, is that we would have the final round signed as well. At least the final round, and anybody else.
We had that in person with an interpreter, like a particular student has an interpreter that works with them. And so they would bring their interpreter. And that's been fine in the past. The closed captioning we struggled with was if they're in breakout rooms, we can't close caption it'll only do it in the main space. And so some things like that. But we did we live streamed our final round, and we did all of our awards on YouTube. So that all went to YouTube, and YouTube will close caption on their own. Like, you can turn it on to let it close caption. And so we did that for those live streamed moments, but we didn't have anyone who needed the closed captioning or an interpreter this time around. So I didn't have to solve that problem, but I wondered, because we did have it in our We the People competition back in January. And so and we didn't do a great job of solving it, I don't think. So I would love to know more if anybody figured it out.
We just know to ask more questions on the front end to make sure that we're nimble enough to respond to the needs. how many of you else, that's a great question too, about how many of you did do live streaming of some sort or plan to do live streaming of anything, and how has that gone?
I'm live streaming the final round on Sunday. I never have done it yet. I know on Zoom there's under the live on YouTube thing.
Yeah.
How's it work from there? Because I haven't looked
It's
into it
actually
yet.
got this. We actually had a huge problem with YouTube yesterday.
Okay.
We tried live streaming from Zoom to YouTube, and there is at least a 24-hour waiting period before it will let you live stream on YouTube as a presenter.
What do you mean?
What I mean is
you have to register the account, the Zoom account 24 hours in
okay.
advance, or else it won't let you stream.
But it's more than that. We had done that over a week ago, and it looked like everything was set. Then we went to log into YouTube several days earlier this week. I say Monday, and it wasn't letting us stream. So we re-registered to get it for the 24 hours, and then ultimately it wouldn't let us proceed. The other thing is that YouTube will not let you live stream from a mobile device or a tablet if you have less than 1,000 followers, which is also sort of interesting. That said, we did live stream successfully yesterday. We pivoted to Facebook Live, which was very effective. And it was instantaneous and basically just as easy for the live stream. So we just live streamed it to Facebook Live, which also retained a video of the finals.
Is there a setting that I need to find on my big settings page for the Facebook? Because all I see under the more dots, right, at least on the national account, is just live on YouTube.
Use the custom live streaming. Do you have that option?
I don't know. I'm still
Okay.
learning what I need to.
I'm gonna cut in for just 1 second because I have to apologize. I have to duck off. I'll leave this meeting in the very capable hands of Ellen and Michael. But I did want to take a moment to make my special announcement, since you all stuck around undoubtedly just to hear the special announcement. Since 1983, roughly the same time that our competition was founded, Maryland has been hosting a mock trial competition. And since 1983, Maryland has not come to nationals. As of yesterday, a vote by the national board has accepted my law of Maryland, and Maryland is now fully integrating with nationals. They've synced their schedule up. They have a 150 team competition that's as old literally as we are, but we will have them for the first time this year. They are registering their state champion as we speak. So that's great news from us. More students being reached by the good work that everybody's doing. I'm going to duck off. I apologize. I assure you I'd rather be here than doing a Clean Water Act case, but this is the nature of my life. And you guys keep going, and we'll catch up on the video. Thanks everybody for coming. I think it was super helpful.
Thanks, Paul.
And I chatted with Michael. I'm happy to help him with YouTube stuff and offline. Y'all don't all have to listen to that shenanigan.
But what if we want to listen to that
If
shenanigan?
you want, you're welcome to do so.
All right.
Anything else, Ellen?
This is Pat. I'm going to sign off too.
Okay. Well, Ellen, I think if you've reached the end of your agenda list of items with everything, then I guess we can go ahead and call it quits for today.
Michael, I wonder if I can bother with a quick question. This is my first time supporting a team going to nationals. And so I just wanted to just confirm if I've helped them with registration and eventually will help them with payment and the pins. Is there anything you need from state coordinators outside of that to support a team going to nationals? Is anyone?
It really depends on how your organization handles nationals and the teams. Every state's a little bit different. Some states, it's like the thing called nationals, you're in it, so good luck, and that's it. And then the team's on their own. Other states, the coordinator is much more involved in everything with it. So it's really kind of how you want to do that, handle that with your team. Tim, they register. You have Liz's email address as part of the registration of the state coordinator and everything. So you'll communicate whatever she needs to know as a state coordinator from the competition side. Is there anything else?
Oh,
Not,
that's great.
not that I have, so.
Okay.
Perfect.
You will get the information from the national board about the state coordinators meeting and the state coordinators roundtable and whatnot that happened, that week in May, but that'll come out, as we get closer to it all.
I see.
Quick question.
Yes.
Do we need any special equipment, or is the national group, I have missed the last two meetings, and maybe it's all that is written down on the national website, but do we need any special equipment or,
In terms of the teens competing,
pardon me?
in terms of the teens competing on Zoom?
Yes,
No, it should be the same thing that they've been doing all season long.
got it. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if we don't have anything else, I will go ahead and stop the recording and let everybody go.
Thank you.